auto data for the month of March has thrown up some very interesting highlights. Is the SUV fever still high, or are people going back to comfortable hatchbacks? And what does the two-wheeler data tell you about EV adoption in the country? Let's talk about that. Kartik, interesting highlights. What do we have?
So I think nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, the growth momentum of auto sales, both four-wheelers and two-wheelers, is something that has ticked in the positive territory month on month for the whole of last year and in fact most of the year before that as well. So coming out of the pandemic, I think this whole concept of shared mobility took a back seat, and the customers really wanted to be in the driver's seat of their own cars and driving something that appeals to their status and appeals to their sort of aspirations in life. And what we really saw coming out of the pandemic was this whole surge of the SUV segment. The SUV segment is now finally, in terms of new sales for the whole financial year 24, from 1st April to 31st of March 2024, we've seen SUVs now dominate a solid 50%, over 50% market share of all the new cars sold. Now, unfortunately for the entry-level cars, and that's a segment that brands like Maruti Suzuki and Hyundai actually, thrived at, we've seen that the hatchback has actually fallen off the grid and is down to just about 28% or so. At the same time, sedans, which were once seen as a symbol of luxury, are now down to just about 9% or so. So if you look at this particular financial year, FY24, you've got 50.4% of the new cars sold belonging to the SUV segment, compared to only under 28% of hatchbacks and 9% of sedans. So that's the broad sort of trend. If you compare it for FY20 onwards to FY24, which is pre-pandemic to now comfortable to say post-pandemic, look at the share of SUVs expanding from about 26%, doubling in about 5 years to about 50%. And at the same time, the leading category of hatchbacks reducing from almost 50%, about 47 odd percent, to about a little more than half of it, to about 27%. That is the broad trend line which is visible in the preferences and the choices that auto drivers and consumers of four-wheelers are making right now. Let's look at specific auto data, the number of cars sold by various brands. And I think if we start with the Bajaj Auto, let's look at the two-wheelers first. The four-wheeler data came out earlier yesterday, but if you look at the two-wheelers, the market leader, pretty much, the Maruti Suzuki of the two-wheeler Bajaj Auto, has seen a 25% year-on-year growth, going up from about almost 2 lakh odd units to about 3 lakh 65 units alone in the month of March. Annual sales for TVS Motor, again if you compare it on a year-to-year basis, has increased about 12%. So this is data for the month of March 2023 versus data for the month of March 2024. So again, in line with Bajaj Auto, about 3.5 lakh odd units sold, but a 12% growth as compared to a 25% growth for Bajaj Auto. Suzuki Motorcycles have seen about half of that. So look at the trend line. Bajaj Auto growing about 25%, TVS growing half of that, about 12%, and Suzuki Motorcycles about half of that, growing at about 6%. So this is as far as the broad motorcycle category goes. The only surprise that comes in is from Hero MotoCorp, which has actually shown a degrowth. Hero Motorcycles have sold fewer number of units in March 2024 versus the number of units it sold in March 2023. But overall, when you talk about volumes, at about 5 lakh units, Hero Motorcycles continues to outshine competition irrespective. Let's move quickly to the four-wheeler data as well and look at the numbers coming in from the likes of Maruti Suzuki. The market leader has grown about 10% in the month of March. Remember, this number could have been much higher had the Jimny, which was launched with much fanfare and after a long wait, did not actually fire, and the SUV segment continues to be a laggard for Maruti. So while SUVs are growing 50%, Maruti, which still does not have a strong SUV in its foray, has not really grown at par with the growth of the segment. Tata Motors, on the other hand, has grown just about 2%, but this growth again is coming largely on the back of the diversification that Tata Group has done from ICE engines, predominantly diesel engines, to electric vehicles as well. Let's move on from Tata Motors to Hyundai. Hyundai has seen a 7% growth, much lower than its arch rival Maruti Suzuki. However, Hyundai for the month of March has beaten Tata Motors and fought itself back to the number 2 position, which it had briefly for the month of February relented to Tata Motors. Mahindra & Mahindra, the pretty much leader in diesel vehicles in SUVs, has grown much faster than competition, growing at about 13%, coming more in line with the overall growth of the SUV segment. The surprise coming out of this pack has actually been MG Motor, which has reduced by about a quarter or so. So sales have been down 23%, down to under 5,000 units. I think this figure is likely to change now going forward with the traction that we are likely to see with more car launches, more vehicle launches every few months with the tie-up that MG Motor India has done with JSW Group. So we will hopefully see more action with MG Motors. The Honda car numbers have come and Honda has moved back in the green territory, growing about 5.6%. The company is attributing this again to the launch of Honda Elevate, the first SUV from the Honda stable in the last 2-3 years or so, ever since it discontinued the CRV and the WRV and the BRV and even the Mobilio, the MPV range. Honda pretty much was stuck only with Jazz, which was discontinued about 1 year back, and Honda City and Honda Amaze. Finally, about 6 months back, it has introduced Honda Elevate, and that has brought it back in the competitive league of SUVs, and this growth of 5.6% coming in for Honda.
Wouldn't be wrong, therefore, to say that SUV is the name of the game going forward, given in the last 4 financial years itself, we've seen the market share of SUV nearly doubling, Kartik.
Absolutely. So I think it's very obvious that people who want to be in control of the steering wheel and people who want to drive. See, I think you've got to remember that car sales are pretty much a reflection of urban consumption.
Right.
You know, it's a barometer through which you measure the health of the urban economy. Two-wheelers, on the other hand, especially scooters, are a reflection of how the rural economy is growing. Right. So when you talk about the urban economy, we know for a fact now that it is not just the capex investments done by the government which is keeping the engines of the economy chugging, but it's also private consumption, and private consumption coming in a large measure by this high frequency indicator of auto sales reflects the notion, at least, that people who want to go ahead and buy vehicles are not too afraid of taking big loans, don't seem to be too afraid of perhaps not finding a job if they lose a job, and perhaps will still be able to continue paying those EMIs. And most importantly, I think it speaks about the aspirations of a growing economy like India, and the fact that people want to participate in that aspirational journey and drive something that makes them feel good, rather than just a utility vehicle that takes them from point A to point B.
Absolutely, and it does look like SUV make people feel good, and reflecting on the aspirations of a new India. It does appear from the data presented as of March of this year that SUV has now breached the 50% passenger vehicle mark, meaning more people are now going for SUVs as opposed to your traditional hatchbacks as well as sedans.